9:17 on the morning of January 22nd, 1943, Second Lieutenant John George crouched in the ruins of a Japanese bunker west of Point Cruz. Through the scope of a rifle his fellow officers had mocked for 6 weeks, he surveyed a banyan tree 240 yards away. The others had laughed at his weapon. To them, it was a toy. To George, it was his lifeline, his promise of precision in a war that demanded it. George was 27 years old, a champion marksman from Illinois. He had 0 confirmed kills. The Japanese snipers in the Point Cruz Groves had killed 14 men in just 3 days. The battalion needed someone who could match patience with precision, courage with skill. That someone was him. Before we follow George into the trees, we need to understand Guadalcanal. In late 1942, American forces had replaced the exhausted Marines who had been fighting since August. They had captured Henderson Field and the western slope of Mount Austin, but the Japanese had retreated into the dense coastal groves west of the Matanacao River, turning the jungle into a sniper's paradise. Mount Austin rose 1,514 feet, its slopes scarred by artillery fire, trenches, and crumbling bunkers. The Japanese, experts in jungle warfare, knew every tree, every vine, every shadow. The 132nd Infantry, freshly arrived from the mainland, had already lost dozens to these hidden marksmen. Enter John George and a rifle that cost him 2 years of National Guard pay. The rifle was a Winchester Model 70. Bolt action, 5 rounds, fitted with a Lyman Alaskan scope, mounted at Camp Forest in Tennessee. It weighed 9 pounds. The scope added another 12 ounces. Compare this to the standard Garand every other man carried. Semi-automatic, 8 rounds, 9.5 pounds, no magnification. Captain Morris had told George to leave it behind. George didn't. For 6 weeks, his rifle sat in a warehouse in Illinois while he watched others clean their issued Garands. Finally, in late December, it arrived. The armourer had asked if it was meant for deer or Germans. George's answer, for the Japanese. George spent hours checking his rifle in the bunker, removing cosmoline, adjusting scope mounts, inspecting the trigger, glass smooth, 3.2 pounds of pressure. He loaded 5 rounds of .3006 ball ammunition. He was alone, with no spotter, no radio, no backup. Just a rifle, a canteen, and patience. The jungle itself was alive. Birds called, insects buzzed. Artillery echoed in the distance. George learned to filter it all, to see movement where the naked eye saw only green. Then he spotted it. A branch shifted. Not the wind, a human form. 87 feet up in a banyan tree. Dark clothing blending with shadows. George adjusted his scope, controlled his breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The sniper fell 90 feet, landing near the base of the tree. 1 down. George scanned again. Another branch moved. Another shadow. 60 yards north, 50 feet high. He fired. Second kill. By noon, he had 8 confirmed kills. 12 rounds fired, 8 hits, 4 misses. The Japanese snipers adapted, stopped moving during daylight. The jungle had become a duel. George's genius was not just marksmanship, it was patience, understanding enemy behavior and anticipating their actions. He used decoys, predicted enemy movement, relocated under fire, and always stayed concealed. He eliminated the remaining 3 snipers in a mix of strategy, skill, and courage, clearing the Point Cruz Groves in 4 days, a task that had already cost the battalion 14 men in 72 hours. If you want to see how a single rifle and a master marksman changed the course of a battle, hit the like button. Share this story to keep these forgotten moments alive. Subscribe if you haven't already. George's battle in the Point Cruz Groves had ended, but the story was far from over. He would take these skills, train a sniper section, and later face even greater challenges in the jungles of Burma. His rifle, his skill, and his courage would become legendary. The Point Cruz Groves were silent now, but Guadalcanal remained a dangerous, shifting landscape. Intelligence reports indicated the Japanese were evacuating west along the Guadalcanal. Within 2 weeks, every remaining soldier would be gone, or dead. George returned to his tent, exhausted but methodical. He field-stripped his Winchester, running patches soaked with cosmoline and gun oil through the barrel until the metal gleamed. Every screw was tightened, every mount checked, every round inspected. Precision mattered. His rifle had saved lives, but it could only do so if maintained like a sacred instrument. At 1400 hours, a message arrived from division headquarters. The battalion commander wanted to see him. George expected a reprimand. Corporal Morris had filed reports accusing him of unauthorized engagement, excessive ammunition expenditure, operating alone. He approached the headquarters tense, expecting confrontation. Instead, he found 3 officers waiting, including Colonel Ferry, regimental commander. Ferry did not ask about mistakes. He asked a single question. Can you train men to do what you've done? George considered the magnitude of the task. He could train men, but it would require time, rifles with optics, and soldiers who could already shoot well. Ferry had 14 Springfield rifles with universal scopes left behind by the Marines, and 40 men in the regiment qualified as expert marksmen. George accepted on one condition. He would keep his Winchester. Ferry approved. 2 miles east of Henderson Field, George assembled 40 men. On paper, they were experts. They had scored top marks in basic qualification with iron sights, but none had experience in combat as snipers. George began with fundamentals: controlling breath, squeezing triggers, reading wind, adjusting for distance and elevation. The Springfield rifles were heavier than George's Winchester, 11 pounds with the universal scope. They were stable but tiring to hold for hours. He taught the men to use natural supports, rocks, fallen logs, sandbags, because the jungle rarely provided perfect shooting positions. Adaptation was essential. Training lasted 3 days. George ran them through shooting at stationary targets from 100 to 400 yards, moving targets, and targets partially concealed by vegetation. By January 30th, 32 of 40 could consistently hit man-sized targets at 300 yards under field conditions. He divided the men into 16 two-man teams, shooter and spotter. The spotter carried binoculars and a Garand. Their role: locate targets, provide security, and switch roles to prevent reliance on a single shooter. 4 teams moved into position west of the Matanakaw River. George paired with Corporal Hayes, a keen-eyed spotter. High on a ridge, they overlooked a trail the Japanese used for resupply. At 07:20, a Japanese soldier appeared. Hayes confirmed the target. George fired. The soldier dropped. Over 6 hours, his team engaged 7 more soldiers. 6 confirmed kills. Across the other teams, 23 Japanese soldiers were eliminated. 0 American casualties. By February 9th, the sniper section had 74 confirmed kills in 12 days. The Japanese evacuation accelerated. Destroyers arrived at Cape Esperance under the cover of night. George's section disrupted rearguard operations, covering advancing American forces with lethal precision. While operating near the Tanamboa River, a Japanese rifleman's bullet struck George in the left shoulder. He spun and fell. Hayes dragged him to cover, called for a corpsman. The wound passed through muscle, sparing bone and major vessels. George was evacuated to a field hospital near Henderson Field. Doctors cleaned, sutured, and assured him he would recover, but not for at least 3 weeks of rest. By February 9th, American forces reached Cape Esperance. It was empty. The campaign was over. George's sniper section had changed the calculus of jungle warfare. 74 confirmed kills, 0 friendly casualties. Division headquarters officially recognized the unit. Colonel Ferry recommended George for a Bronze Star. But George's war was far from over. While recovering, he received orders for a classified mission in Burma. Experienced combat officers were needed for deep penetration jungle operations. George volunteered. By April, George was in India with 200 other officers, assigned to a 3,000-man unit. They called themselves Merrill's Marauders, officially designated the 5,307th Composite Unit on May 28, 1943. Their mission: long-range jungle patrols, operating behind Japanese lines without resupply, modelled after British Chindits. George's role: rifle platoon leader. Officially, not a sniper. Unofficially, the Army knew his capabilities. He modified his Winchester for weight, replaced the wooden stock with a synthetic one, switched from Lyman Alaskan to lighter Weaver 330 scope. Every ounce counted on patrols lasting weeks. The Marauders advanced through northern Burma, aiming to capture Myitkyina Airfield, vital for Allied supply routes into China. Japanese troops numbered roughly 4,000. Mountains, rivers, dense jungle, no roads. Supplies carried by pack mules, often lost to the terrain. George's battalion marched 83 miles in the first week. Men collapsed from exhaustion. Malaria cases rose. Mules broke legs, had to be euthanized. By March, 217 miles covered, 12 engagements with Japanese forces. Skirmishes, ambushes, hit-and-run tactics. George's unit never held ground. They moved fast, harassed supply lines, and created chaos behind enemy positions. George used his Winchester 3 times. 412 yards at a Japanese officer directing troops. 380 yards at a machine gun nest. 290 yards against a sniper pinning down patrols. 3 shots, 3 kills. He never fired twice at the same target. His method: fire, relocate, vanish. The march to Myitkyina lasted 3 months. By May, the Marauders had covered over 700 miles. Disease and exhaustion were worse than combat. The 5,300 men who began the mission were reduced to fewer than 3,000 combat-effective soldiers. May 17th, Myitkyina Airfield captured. Operation success. Casualties severe. George's Winchester survived, but in 3 months it was fired only 7 times. Close-range jungle combat dominated, leaving long-range marksmanship largely unused. George realized modern warfare was changing. Bolt-action rifles like his Winchester excelled in certain environments, but semi-automatic rifles like the Garand were becoming standard. Precision alone was no longer enough. Industrial scale, mass training, and standardized equipment were the future. George evacuated with the Marauders in June 1944. Reassigned to Fort Benning, Georgia as a captain, he trained infantry officers in marksmanship and jungle tactics. His lessons: move silently, adapt to terrain, operate without supply lines, and maintain patience under pressure. The Winchester, now a relic of Guadalcanal, sat safely in his quarters. Discharged in January 1947 as a lieutenant colonel, decorated with 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and the Combat Infantry Badge, George returned to Illinois. He enrolled at Princeton on the GI Bill, then Oxford, and finally East Africa, studying regional politics. In 1947, George wrote Shots Fired in Anger, a 400-page technical manuscript detailing jungle sniper tactics, rifle ballistics, and small unit operations. Initially unpublished, it became a classic after the NRA convinced him to release it. Today, it remains a reference for historians and firearms enthusiasts alike. George witnessed the evolution of military rifles, from the Garand to the M16, and the formalization of sniper roles. His experiences foreshadowed the importance of precision, adaptation, and training in modern warfare. John George died on January 3, 2009, aged 90. His Winchester Model 70, which had shaped battles and inspired tactics, now rests in the National Firearms Museum in Fairfax, Virginia. To most, it is a vintage hunting rifle. To those who understand, it represents courage, skill, and the transformative power of a single man with patience, a rifle, and purpose. If this story moved you, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Keep these memories alive. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Share these stories because heroism should never fade into silence.